So I want to look at this DC Games thing from a broad perspective, and it's one that we've all had for a long time. If you've been following the DC Games, none of this stuff is new to you, especially when you see what has pretty much gone down with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I feel bad for the developers. It's actually one of those things where, as a developer, nobody would want to work on a video game that fails. Ladies and gentlemen, many of you know here in the community that I've been working on my own superhero video game. And man, the most harrowing thing ever is that a video game can be made and audiences may not like it. In fact, that's something that I fear drastically. However, I'm going to make a video game with all of my audiences in mind. I'm going to be taking notes from you guys. I already know the things that you guys would love to see in a video game, and so that already is helpful to me. Now, here's the really crazy part about all of this stuff. Remember when we talked about Jason Schreier's report about Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, right? We talked about how most of the articles seem to have blamed Stephen Hill and talked about how in the development process, a lot of things were, being changed and shifted and all of that stuff. But that's normal development in a video game because ideas don't necessarily come to, fruition for you to know how they're going to actually pan out until you test most of them. Sometimes some ideas are cool. Some ideas, they work right out the bat as they come out of your mouth and you put them to the test. They're beautiful ideas. Immediately they're iterated. But something is really interesting in this whole conversation. I want to point out a piece of this interview that David Haddad did years ago when he was actually talking about how to move a lot of the Warner Brothers IPs to live service games. This was an interview that was actually put together by VentureBeat or GamesBeat. Well, it is VentureBeat. I don't know. I guess their segment is GamesBeat. And, there was like a Q&A going on and all that stuff. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is an executive that knows how to keep his division profitable, by the way. I'm not saying anything is wrong with his approach because if you guys know, Warner Brothers has changed hands in their leadership, but David Haddad has been one of the few that has actually stayed, probably the only person who stayed in charge of his division when the merger was going on. But the, journalist over here asked the question and said, what do you think of E3? And he replied and said, it's a great time to have talented development studios thinking about how to keep fans engaged. It's a great time to own big, durable game franchises as they live longer in a life cycle, engaging consumers longer. For E3, as you know, Warner Brothers has a seat on the ESA board that manages this. This cultural relevance of E3, I haven't seen all the numbers yet, but more than 69,000 people attending, 15,000 of which are consumers. But most important, the record amount of streaming happening from the show, the record amount of fandom syndicated around the world, the complexion of people deciding to come to show. It's great to see an industry that still has this cultural relevance. This was a time where the gaming industry was bubbling. Things were just wonderful. But things have changed. This is a different time right now. Remember, this particular article was done somewhere around, this interview was somewhere around 2018, June 19, 2018. Now, 2 years after that, Warner Brothers basically revealed two video games in their own event called the DC Fandom event. This is where we saw Gotham Knights and where we saw Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. In this particular time, the entire gaming industry had basically moved slightly more further away from the hype machine that E3 could generate. You saw your own, influencers and your YouTubers like Young Gear when he came out of that Cyberpunk, viewing and was like, ooh, this is so great. And, you know what I mean? And a lot of the, YouTubers were excited. But at this point in time in 2020, we're doing Summer Games Fest. We're doing DC Fandom event. We're doing, all kinds of presentations from the publishers via YouTube live streams. So now everybody can pause the tape. Everybody can actually, hone into what it is that they're looking at. And all of that fashion and pizzazz basically washed away. It was only the best games that were unveiled that got to win at the time. Elden Ring was one of those games that had been unveiled a little bit, but in that time, people got to see a little bit more of it. And I think this transformation in the industry basically missed the mark of what keeps players engaged. What has always kept players engaged has not necessarily been the live service games. It had always been authentic experiences that surrounded characters that players could resonate with at the end of the day. And I think the gaming organizations and the big video game companies and publishers, I think they missed out on it, thinking that engagement was basically making a game they wanted, using hype to basically push the game forward, and then eventually players seeing that this game is not for them. I think the last game that got away with it, that was a big title, was Anthem. Remember, Anthem was a year after that in 2019. This is when EA was able to take influencers, take a lot of different things that the internet kind of, trusted in a sense, and brought it to people, and eventually turned out that Anthem was not a good game. Thankfully, the game that followed Anthem was, at least to an extent, very good. This was Tom Clancy's The Division 2, because The Division 1 had already been a huge, challenging issue for a lot of people, which basically built its own hype, based on the hype machine. Thankfully, it had something to offer, a strong community, but you could tell that the industry was shifting. By the time games like Gotham Knights came around, even though Gotham Knights was not a live service game, it had this continuity loop to it and had some multiplayer aspects to the game, but there were no microtransactions. Well, I take that back. There was a little pack that gave you some resources and a special set of gear, but other than that, there were no microtransactions that you had to basically sit there and grind for. All of the outfits and everything that, unlike other games, made you pay for could be attained from the game, except for that one specific outfit pack, which was the Jim Lee outfit pack. But at the end of the day, what pretty much happened was these games could not hide under the radar of hype. The PlayStation event exposed Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, and it just became a thing where this live service push and basically feigning engagement, when it literally is basically having a game churn out money for you over the years, has now become a fad that has waned very thin among gamers. I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Do you think what we're actually looking at here is pretty much the tail end of this particular fad that kind of kicked off after, say, a lot of these companies with EA and Battlefront 2 and all of this stuff were pretty much, going through these growing pains in the industry, and now the saturation point has just hit, and with more free-to-play games based on all of the competition, we're now seeing how no one really is interested in playing any live service game, whether or not you want to sell it for $10 or $15. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks once again for watching. We'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.